I am the living experience. I am the lifelong proof. Color me the poetry of nothing but the truth.
Color me a love child lost in the promised land.
We don't have the monitor on?
No, I'll turn it on.
Yeah, if you can turn it on.
You're live. You're
Hmm?
live right now.
Welcome to another edition of Color Me Poetry. This is Danny Queen, and I'm here with my illustrious guest, Mr. Michael Kent. And you've written this beautiful book, Michael, and wow, it's just amazing. And you're from our neighboring county to the south of us.
Yes, Calvary County.
Calvary County.
Yes.
We don't know much about Calvary County. You know, there are, 100 some counties? How many counties in Maryland?
Well, actually,
That's quite a few.
I'm also president of the Calvary County branch of the NAACP, so
okay.
I know that. So there's a branch in every county.
Yes.
So there's 24 branches of the NAACP. Well, actually 25. Baltimore, for some reason, got 2. But there's 24 counties.
So you're from Calvary County. Let me speak for myself. I don't know a lot about Calvary County. I've been there. I mean, I've been to Solomon's Island. I've been to,
Chesapeake Beach.
Chesapeake Beach, yeah.
Right, because we still have the...
yes, all of that. All that's Calvary.
The slot machines there. That's why everybody comes to Chesapeake Beach.
I know, everybody know about that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Chesapeake and what's the town right across? Chesapeake and...
North Beach.
North Beach.
Yes.
Yes, everybody knows about that. And really, that's about all I know about Calvary County, really.
That's all most people know about it. Most people, if you say that, will think it's on the Eastern Shore. Yeah. But we're Southern Maryland.
So it's interesting because my mom used to go down there to play bingo.
Oh, yeah.
And I when I first discovered it, to a friend of mine who went there to North Beach to the beach, and I was telling my mom, she was like, "Oh, I've been going down there for about 40 years." For
Okay.
what? She said, "Oh, I go down there and play bingo."
So if she had been going down there 40 years ago, they wouldn't have allowed her in. They didn't allow blacks into North Beach or Chesapeake Beach back in the
Back in the 40s.
60s.
Yeah, well, she been going there a long time.
Yeah. So the schools,
Yeah.
the school systems didn't integrate there until 67.
And they didn't allow black people to come in?
Nope, no. Totally segregated. Although
I've read some of that history on the different on the boardwalk.
Right,
Some of the
but-
history. Of course,
well,
they didn't
that's
say
their
that
history.
though.
Right, but that was the white history. The black history, for the most part, we were probably usually 60-70% of the county from the time of slavery all the way up to the 1930s, 1940s, with the whites only being 20-30%. But of course, they had the power, so they ran things. But the reason I got interested in this is if you come to Calvary County, you'll see that it's a healthy place to live. So my family lived a long time. And when I say lived a long time, my father lived to be 100, his mother 98.
Really?
He has a cousin, she was 107. So, and my father was born in 1914. So he got to speak to people that had been slaves because they would live up through the 1920s, the late 1920s and things. So he was always telling these stories about what they had told him, and my grandparents were telling stories about what they had told them. And over time, of course, when you're younger, you're not interested in that stuff.
Yeah,
But as
when
you
you're a
grow
kid.
older, I became more interested in it and just wanted to find out if what they were telling me was true. At one point, and I was probably for 8 years, I was on the Governor's Commission for African American History and Culture. And so on that commission, we went to different counties. We had meetings every other month, different counties. We had a lot here in Prince George's County. Prince George's County has a lot of history as well.
Yes.
Been over in the Eastern Shore and every place, and people were talking about their history and how they wanted to start museums and things to preserve their histories. And we had nothing like that in Calvary County. So
Why?
that's
It wasn't that
the
progressive that
interest. Most people, like I said, there was. Well, what I told you earlier was back when I was growing up, there was one drive-in movie theater and there was one Hardee's. That was the entertainment. So everybody was looking to get out of Calvary County. So the young people flocked away from Calvary County as soon
There's
as they got
nothing
out of
to
high
do
school. Right.
for young people, yeah.
Absolutely nothing. You had older people, senior people like to come there for the peace and quiet. The younger people are trying to find some action somewhere and get out of there. So
That makes
with
sense.
that in mind, there wasn't that interest in preserving anything. So when I finally started researching, I was able to find documents on a lot of the things that my family had told me. Fortunately for my family, we used to be owned by the governor of Maryland back in the 1830s. And actually that's where our
Wow.
last name,
Governor.
Kent, came from. Yeah, it was Governor Joseph Kent. He had his family.
1840s?
Yeah, he was governor in the 1830s. He died in
30s.
1837, but my family had been there, can document them back to the Kent family back in the to 1780. Okay, a prominent Kent family in Lower Marlboro. So what had happened was this guy, Joseph Kent, he grew up in Calvary County as well, and just gives you an idea of what the medical knowledge was at that time. He was a doctor at 20. Okay, which tells you how, tells you how much education you needed back in the 1800s for that. So he got into a political dispute at 20, and so he left Calvary County and came up here to Prince George's County and to Bladensburg. And right, he joined the military, fought in the War of 1812, joined Congress after that, and eventually became the governor of Maryland. So when he passed, when he died in the 1830s, he still owned his family's property in Calvary County. And so what he did was, well, there was an estate sale, so they sold the land and also the slaves. Because his family had like 300 slaves up here in Prince George's County at that time. They only had about 60 in Calvary County. So one of the slaves that was sold at an estate sale was my great-great-grandmother. Her name was Susan. She was sold to a man named James King, not too far away, it was down on the river. James King, and James King ultimately fathered 3 children by her. Okay.
So your book centers around all of this history that's been unknown.
Well, I guess known by some, but just not told.
Yeah, or just not talked about.
Not talked about, unless it was through oral histories. Unfortunately, I said my family lived so long. Even the one that had been born a slave, my great-grandfather, was born in 1839. He lived to 1928, so he got to talk to people about this as well, about
and
being a
pass it
slave.
on. Yeah.
Passing along the information, as long as you're willing to listen and live long enough to listen.
Now, let's talk specifically about the book Mulatto and why a book like this is so necessary.
Well, because it tells you...
And first of all, let me say, how did the book come about?
Well, as I was saying, from the oral history, and then I decided to document that they were telling the truth about these things.
Right.
When I said I was fortunate that we belonged to the governor of Maryland, a lot of his documents were archived up here in Annapolis.
Okay.
Because the courthouses, which is pretty standard, everything was made of wood back in those days. So courthouses and churches kept burning down and records were lost. And of course, they didn't keep very good records on blacks anyway.
Yes. Okay,
but they happened to. So that started it. And then we also had, during the War of 1812, which really intrigued me, Calvary County was sort of the center of things during the War of 1812, with the British coming up the Patuxent. The British actually came up the Patuxent in 1814 and all the way to Washington, D.C. and burned down the White House in 1814.
Yeah, they did burn it.
And when they came through Calvary County, they freed a lot of slaves. And they gave them the choice. They said, well, okay, you can just run away, because they were trying to disrupt the economy. Run away, or you can join us, become a soldier, or we'll transport you someplace else. So there was actually in 1814 a lot of blacks that left and ended up in Trinidad or in Nova Scotia, okay, that went with the British.
Yeah, a lot of blacks went with the British during that time.
My family didn't go because they were approached by the British, and I was saying, why? What are you sitting here for? So they were actually, the reason a lot of blacks stayed and didn't run away is they wanted to reconnect with their family. At a very young age, you'll find, and this is common in Calvary County, Charles County, Prince George's, all around where you had slaves, they sold the family away from each other. They would sell the children away. They would sell...
That was common practice.
Right, because, again, we were going to outnumber them, okay? So the last thing you want is to be outnumbered by somebody who has family that you may be putting the whip to. So if you're abusive to somebody, they were afraid you're more than likely going to take some revenge on them. So that's why they sold the children off at a young age, or they sold the wife away, or the father away, so that there wouldn't be that connection. So what I found was that the reason they didn't want to leave for some other country is there was still that chance that they could find their family again. And that's what they were hoping for, to be able to reconnect.
So they wanted to stay put.
Yes.
Yes. That makes sense.
Yeah. Plus there were other ways. At that time, there were different ways of getting out of slavery that they knew about other than running away. And there were times where the different ministries might find some guilt. Okay, it was usually the Episcopal Church that was running things in Southern Maryland at that time. And if they allowed the blacks to be baptized, sometimes that would be enough to get them freed. You could also buy your
Buy your
freedom.
way out. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so pretty much the work week was 6 days a week for blacks, for slaves. And then on Sundays, you could do what you wanted to. You could go visit family if you knew where they were, or you could work for some other plantation or farm and earn money for your freedom or for a family member's freedom to buy them out.
And they did that for years to buy.
Yes, it did. It
buy
was
the
pretty
freedom.
common practice
Yeah.
to buy them out. And then the final way, more common way, was to age out. This was tobacco. Tobacco was harder than cotton, believe it or not, and backbreaking. So you were kind of, your usefulness was sort of over.
Was it harder to raise tobacco as opposed to cotton?
I don't know. I never raised cotton. I did raise.
I never raised either one of them.
But I know that it's backbreaking work and it's hard on you, so that by the time you're in your late 30s, early 40s, it was more expensive to keep you as a slave with the medical problems you're going to have at that time and other things and feeding and clothing you than to give you your freedom. So they knew they could age out of slavery, which is a common practice. So in 1800, there were over 8,000 free blacks in the state of Maryland, if you want to call them free.
Quote unquote.
Right. One of the things I found was that you really were not free to go. You had to have free papers on you, pass on you, and they were very encouraging for you to leave the state. But if you left the state for more than a certain period of time, for more than like 2 weeks or something like 2 or 3 weeks, and then you came back in, your pass was no longer valid, and they could sell you back into slavery. Just like that movie, 12 Years a Slave.
Yes.
Anybody that's black, they can just take them in and sell them south.
Well, they may have been looking for somebody specific, but they would take anybody.
They'll take anybody because, you know, we all
Didn't
look
make no
alike according to
difference.
them. They all
Yeah,
look
we all
alike and
look
just
alike
sell them
anyway.
off, make
Yeah.
some money for them.
Yeah.
It was a pretty common practice. We had a person there, his name was Charles Ball, and he actually wrote the first that I could find of anyone. This is before Harriet Tubman, he wrote the first slave narrative about what it was like to be a slave in Southern Maryland. Of course, you heard of Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Of course.
Based on
Yes.
Josiah Henson.
Yes.
His narrative was even before that, before Josiah Henson.
Oh, wow.
So he was one of those. He was born in Calvary County. As an adult, they decided to sell him off, again, to separate the family, because he had a wife and he had kids, and they sold him down to, I think his first stop was North Carolina. It was a 1-month march down there in chains. He wrote this book called The Life and Narrative of Charles Ball, a Slave. And that was one of the first slave narratives that came out. After a while, the owner in North Carolina passed away, died, and he was transferred to another owner, a relative, a brother or something, in Georgia, who was particularly cruel. So he was able to escape, but it took him more than a year to work his way back to Calvary County. And I was saying, well, what did you come back here for? Why don't you just keep on going to Canada? He wanted to reconnect with his family.
Yeah.
So he was able to reconnect with his wife, and whatever slave owner she was working for allowed him to stay there on the farm and work. Okay. The War of 1812 came along, and he joined. He was thinking, okay, if I help these people, maybe they'll give me my freedom, because he was still a fugitive slave. So in 1814, he joined the U.S. Navy, and he served with Commander Joshua Barney and helped fight the British off when they were coming up the Patuxent. Even after that, he was dishonorably discharged. Somebody remember, that guy's a slave. You know, he doesn't have any free
They came
papers.
after him?
Sent him right back down to Georgia, where he was before. He escaped again. This time he came back faster. He was able to get on a, actually before they found out about him, he was able to buy some land of his own. He was working part-time, bought some land of his own, so he and his wife and family had land of their own that they were working when they yanked him up again and sold him back down south.
Wow.
By the time he got back this time, they had already sold his wife and children south somewhere, so he had no way of finding them.
Now, let me say to those who may be watching, we're talking with Mr. Kent, Michael Kent, and we're talking about, in his book, Mulatto, and we're talking about the black history of Calvary County, Maryland. That's a deep history, brother. Let me share this poem, and then we'll get right back to the story. I want you to pick up right where you left off. Where will my people be? I often think of the old times when our fathers were beaten and our mothers stood crying, and oh, how awful it must have been to be brought to this place and sold as slaves to an Indian race, working the fields of sugar, cotton, and corn, and begging for mercy from the day they were born. Getting no rest and having no fun, from the dawn of morning to the setting of the sun, when old Jesus, they prayed, would take us back someday to our homes far away. Were the prayers they said all in vain, or are we not slaves of a different name? To this thing called the man, had we not been loyal to care for his sick and die in his wars. But no longer will we come to his kissing feet while our women are raped and our children are beaten, getting no rest and having no fun to the dawn of morning to the setting of the sun. If war is the answer, and so it must be, we care not for bloodshed but to be free. And if in it I am killed, I know my body will be free, for my soul will still cry, where will my people be? By James F. Queen.
Very good.
Fits in with exactly what we're talking about.
Yes. And
And that deep history.
In line with what you're talking about, as I said, when Ball's family was sold away, one of the first court cases involving a black slave had to do with a case in Calvary County. His name was Isaac Brown.
Okay.
This was in the 1830s that this happened. Isaac Brown was a slave there, and his owner had been shot. Somebody ambushed him, shot him in the back. He lived, but he was injured. The owner decided to blame Isaac Brown for it, even though Isaac
put it
Brown,
on him.
Yeah, well, he had his reasons. It's like I said before, you always think that somebody's going to look to get some revenge on you if you mistreat someone.
Yes.
So maybe 10 years earlier, that same owner had killed Isaac Brown's brother because he came back from some event. He had permission to go somewhere. He came back late, and the owner killed him. Okay.
Wow.
So he always thought that Isaac Brown was looking at him, with a cock eye or something,
So
angry.
he killed his brother.
Right. So he said, all right, let's charge this guy with shooting me. We don't know who did it. There were people that said Isaac Brown was 2 miles away at the time of the shooting, but that doesn't matter. Okay.
They didn't have to prove anything.
Didn't
They
have to
just
prove
said
anything. All you
it.
have to do is make the accusation. So they took him to the local jail, and because it was just an assault charge, not murder, so they whipped him 100 times. Then they just let him heal up for 30 days or so, and then whipped him again. And then they sold him. They took him to Baltimore to be taken by ship down to New Orleans to be sold. When they got him down to New Orleans, he was able to escape with the help of, and a lot of white people did help blacks escape. There were a lot of abolitionists.
Yes, of course. Underground Railroad.
Right, so they helped him to escape and make his way to Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, up the, what's that religion? I can never remember the name of the religion that helped a lot of blacks. It'll come to me at some point.
That was the Amish?
No.
Not the Amish?
No.
In Pennsylvania?
Right,
Yeah.
they say thee and thou.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of it.
Yeah, but it'll come
Yeah.
to me. So anyway, they helped him, and again, you're always wanting to get back to family. Let your family know that you're okay. So they sent word back here to Calvary County. He's fine. He's with us here, just outside of Philadelphia. That was a mistake because now Calvary County government found out about that letter somehow and said, well, now we want him back again, okay, and punish him again.
They went and they send
The
bounty hunters to get
governor.
him?
No, they had the governor of Maryland send a warrant to the governor of Pennsylvania to send him back here for further punishment. And of course, you had no rights. You had no constitutional rights. There was no such thing as can't be tried twice for the same offense. No, you
there's
had no
nothing like
constitutional
that.
rights
Yeah.
for that. So actually, that case went to court and they lost, and they were going to send him back. But again, he was able to escape again, and this time he was able to make it all the way to Canada. And Isaac Brown can be found in history that once they made him his way to Canada, he went to school and he became a medical doctor and helped a lot of blacks that were up in Canada that had run away and helped things. But this is somebody that this guy thought was so worthless we can just shoot him on the spot or whip him to death because they're useless people, but he's able to get this medical degree and help all of these people. One of the things Calvert is known for, when I said that you had no rights, the person who decided that, it was a case called the Dred Scott case, a Supreme Court case.
Yeah, the well-known case, Dred Scott's decision.
Right. Roger B. Taney was a Supreme Court justice, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who wrote that decision. He was born and raised in Calvert County. Okay,
really?
So you see where that attitude
Calvert
came
County,
from.
Maryland.
Right. So yeah, he wrote the Dred Scott decision, in taking all rights away because you weren't human.
Well, they essentially said that a black man had no rights that a white man was bound to respect. Something to that
Yes,
effect.
and also because, well, his reasoning is you're not named in the Constitution, so therefore you have no rights under the Constitution.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, but didn't the Constitution say that all men are created equal? Oh,
Yes,
but we weren't men,
we weren't
that's
men.
right. Yeah,
Weren't
we
men.
were 3/5.
Right, just like it didn't mention women, so women didn't have those rights, even white women. It actually, the only ones that had rights were white property owners. So you could be a white male, but if you didn't own property,
You still
didn't have that right
still
either.
didn't have any power.
Yeah, so that was one of the things. So Calvert had an effect with that case, court case. He also had an effect with the Dred Scott decision. We also had a lot of influence with Frederick Douglass later on.
course, yeah.
There was an organization called, of course, everything comes from religion. Even though blacks could not read, they were allowed to come to church. So like the Episcopal churches in Calvary County would have the slave galleys. So you'd have the white families down here, and you'd have the slaves up there listening to what's going on. And like with my family and many other families, you're going to have a lot of little light-skinned kids up there in that slave gallery. But everybody just kind of looked away for that and didn't pay any attention to where those little light-skinned kids came from.
So that brings us to mulatto.
Right.
Okay.
The women seemed to accept that, and the men accepted it as
It
well.
was a common practice, of
Yes.
course.
So, and that comes into play later on to actually help people. But so it's this group that was formed in the 1850s, and it was actually formed in Baltimore, called the Galilean Fishermen. Because I jumped ahead a little bit. When I said they were attending church with the whites, they could not read. Although it was not illegal to know how to read if you were black, you know, before the Civil
wasn't
War.
illegal?
It was not illegal to know how to read, but it was illegal to have abolitionist material on you. So you can get 20 years for having abolitionist material on you. Now, what's abolitionist material? Anything they don't like. So,
Well, yeah.
so one black person, received a 10-year sentence because he had a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that he said he actually wasn't his, but somebody said it was his, and he received 10 years for that. So
Wow.
obviously blacks didn't want to have any reading material on them. The other thing they did, and this happened after the case down in the, where was it, where they, the slave revolt, Nat Turner's revolt.
Turner's, yeah.
So after Nat Turner's
Virginia.
revolt, there were specific laws passed here in Maryland that blacks could not congregate. It was funny language. You can't have more than
One or two
blacks together
Yes.
without there being at least one respectable white person, and that was a respectable white
So
person.
who determined who was respectable and who was not?
Right, whoever wants to make a complaint or not make a complaint.
Was
But that kept them
respectable
from
enough.
having churches. So there were no organized churches for blacks in anywhere in Maryland until after the Civil War. Okay. You had little tent meetings out where, you know, they were hiding.
Down by the
something like
river
that.
somewhere.
Right, but not an organized church because of that law that they could all be subject to being arrested. Because you didn't want them meeting together and they felt they were going to be plotting against the white slave owners, which they probably would have.
I would have too.
So when they finally started organizing, like in Baltimore in the 1850s, there's this group called the Galilean Fishermen that was started by blacks and had black men and women in it.
Okay.
And they were the ones that helped to organize school systems, to organize churches early on after slavery. So we had, I don't know why, well I do know why now, but it was more convenient to get to Baltimore from Calvary County than to get to Washington, D.C. Okay. Even though you think Washington, D.C. is closer.
It's closer, that's what I'm thinking.
But you had to go by water. So my grandmother told me this, that she was born in 1893, you would have to go to the bay and get on a steamboat at like 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. That steamboat would then take you with cargo. So the blacks would be down at the bottom with the animals, the livestock, and the cargo. The whites would be up at the top riding passengers. That steamship would take you across the bay to the eastern shore, pick up some more cargo and passengers,
Oh, that's how
then
you
come
did
into
it.
Baltimore. So it was an all-day trip to get to Baltimore.
Wow.
Okay. But that was more convenient than getting to D.C. because nobody had cars, you know, no one had horses. You had to take that ship in. So people would go back
And they were
forth
stopping to get
Baltimore.
cargo.
Yeah, so people were going back and forth from Calvary to Baltimore, and they'd bring that information back. We had a prominent person from Baltimore, his name was Carroll, who went up there. He was one of those that actually worked and bought his father's freedom before he left to go to Baltimore in 1857. And he was with some of the early historic black churches up there in Baltimore that Frederick Douglass would visit.
Now, in Calvary County, were there a predominance of Episcopal church? Were there other congregations that were
Well, back at
dominant?
that time, there were two major churches.
Okay.
Both Episcopalian, one at the northern end of the county and one at the southern end of the county, because they received these grants, you know, from the king back 1600. So those were the churches that had everything, and you paid actually your taxes to the church at that time, not to the government, to the church.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, the churches were the power during that time. And
This book is well researched, man. How long did it take you
like 20 years or so.
of researching this information?
Yeah, going everywhere, to the state archives, the national archives, walking cemeteries,
You had to
going
do
to
all of
different
that.
churches and things, just to dig up things, talking to people in their homes. A lot of the pictures came just from talking to people in their homes, and they had family pictures.
Interesting couple, man. I mean,
Right.
really.
But the Galilean Fishermen brought the organization back. This is how you organize your school system. This is how you're going to organize your church system, and which was tough to do when no one could read or write. So
Yeah, how do you do that when nobody can read or
well,
write?
that's where it came from, them sitting up in the galleys. They were listening to the songs that were being sung, and so they were repeating those songs and actually making up more songs of their own. So the early churches, and that's why it's kind of a tradition in the church today, all the singing, because that's how it
Yes.
was conveyed. That's how the word was conveyed, was through song.
singing.
Because they couldn't read it, so they were conveying it through song.
Wow.
And
I never thought about that. That's interesting.
And I first became aware of that.
That's why we have all these big hymnals and stuff.
Yeah,
with all
because
these
that's how
songs in
you
it.
pass the word along to someone else that couldn't read it. So when I was in a funeral, and it's like, how you read the obituary during
Yes.
funerals, and I kept asking people, why do you read? I mean, we got it right here. What do you have to read it to me for? And then somebody, said to me, hey, for the longest period of time, there's usually only one or two people that could read that were black. So that's why it's that tradition of reading the obituary as well, just like with the songs.
Yes,
in the
they read the
churches.
words to the song.
Yeah, so the Galilean Fishermen helped them understand that they had to go to other places. They had to go to Pennsylvania and other places that were a little more progressive than Southern Maryland and find blacks that could read and write to bring them back to Calvary to start the school system.
Oh, wow.
So at first they did the churches, and usually the schools, the one-room schoolhouses, were on church grounds, because then you knew you had a neighborhood there. And you're generally within like 5 to 10 miles, so that you knew you'd have walking distance for the kids to go there. And the one-room schoolhouses were like 18 by 18, which you could have 30,
One
40
big
kids.
room.
Yeah, and it was first
With a
through
stove in the middle?
Yeah, first through the 7th grade. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen those pictures of those schools, though, particularly in the South. But
Right, one teacher first through the 7th grade, and the kids were off and
how
on.
long would kids go to school during that time?
Depended on what you were doing, because it was off and on for some, especially boys, that might have to leave and work the tobacco.
Work
and
the
then come
tobacco
back.
field, yeah.
So it might take you until you're 17 or 18 to get through the 7th grade. Or you might finish at 13 or 12. So it depended.
Wow.
Okay.
So you had to leave school to go and work and come back to
Yes.
school, and you still be in the 7th grade.
Right, because you hadn't advanced. Yeah, you might still be in the 1st or 2nd grade when you're 14 or 15 year old. So it wasn't because of your intellect. It just, you couldn't stay. You had to work. You had to take care of the family.
It's so important you said it, because I mean, you can't look at it through today's terms, because it's a totally different time that so many of us now that seem
Right.
foreign to it. But that's the importance of history.
Right,
That's
and that's
why
one of the
history is
reasons
so
the
important.
mulatto comes in, because we had just that one-room schoolhouse. Calvary County didn't get a high school until the 1930s. So they started the school system in the 1880s, okay, but didn't get a high school until the 1930s. Reason being, the fear. The white government had to approve this school system, get the books and everything. The last thing you want, and again, we always outnumbered them 70-30, 60-40.
Right.
You don't want a lot of educated blacks
No,
around you.
of course not.
Because then they would know to run for office and take all this power and land and things away
Yes,
from them. So they
of course.
just never gave them the school system. There was a chance to get one before the we
30s?
finally got one in 1940, but in the 1930s, and there was a brilliant architect that came to Calvary. He was actually born up in Towson, and he did a lot of the buildings. He designed a lot of the buildings at
Towson
Howard University.
Okay.
Okay. Can't even blacked out on his name. But anyway,
It'll come to you.
yeah, it's going to come to you, just like the other thing with the religion. So he went to school at Towson, then he went to school out of state, became an architect, came back to Howard University, designed a lot of those buildings. He designed a lot of the buildings all around Washington, D.C. in the 1920s. He was a wealthy black man. He had cars, several cars. He had several houses.
He's
He
been
had
down
millions. No.
Wasn't Banker?
No.
Okay. Because he was an architect as well.
Yeah, but he was well
That's
before that time.
Yeah, that's right. That was many years before him. So.
Yeah. So the frustrating thing for this man was that he's a brilliant guy. He was still designing buildings. He had to meet with different people in Washington, D.C., white people, to get his buildings built. And he was so angry that he would always have to go out a day or so beforehand, wherever he was going to meet in Washington, D.C., go out a day or two ahead of time to find some place that would let him use the bathroom or even get a drink of water.
Oh, get something to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know that.
Yeah. So he said, I'm sick of this. He said, we got to have a community for ourselves, okay? And so he was looking, he had lots of money, and then after the crash in '29, there was lots of land available because the whites had lost their money. He found
In the stock market.
300 or 400 acres available on the bay in Calvary County, and he bought that land.
Oh.
Okay, and it was his goal, his desire to build what he was going to call the Black Atlantic City. And he was going to have all the high schools, grade school through high school. He's going to have his own post office, own mail system, everything. And he did all the design for it. He worked in his office at Howard University, brought in other engineers and architects and plumbers and things to design all this stuff. And he submitted the plan to the Roosevelt administration. This was during the New Deal part in the early 1930s, and it was approved. He was going to need like $15 million. So it was initially approved, and that's when the Calvary County government found out about it and said, no, we can't have this, because this would bring in blacks for jobs, thousands of blacks from all over the place, not just from southern Maryland,
No,
but
what
bring them from
yeah.
D.C., Baltimore. They said they estimated they'd be coming from Pittsburgh down there for that kind of work. So then they put the squeeze on Howard University and other places to stop this guy.
So did they try to take the land from him as well?
Well, couldn't, because he owned the land.
Yeah.
That was the neat thing back at that time. Now you can't do anything without, you don't really own your land. You need a permit to do everything.
Yes.
So back then, nobody had electricity, nobody had telephones.
Right.
You had land, you could build on it. And he had the knowledge that he could do the windmills and things for the electricity and for the other things that he would need. So he was completely self-sufficient for this.
And they couldn't have that either.
No, and it was going to be called Calvertown, okay? And he had this, beautiful design for the town and everything. So they went to their senators, U.S. senators, and got them to put pressure on the federal government to say, if you give this man the money, okay, we're not going to vote for other things that you want. And they had naturally a southern bloc of senators that were going to back them up on this. So they cut the money off from him. So he tried to do private sources. And then they cut the money off from that by going to Howard University and saying, you need to get rid of this guy. He was the head of the architect department. And they said, well, he was using the office to bring in people to design this, and so he needs to pay us rent for all that time he was doing that. So ultimately they forced him out.
Financially, yeah.
Yeah, so he ended up coming back to Calvary County, but he was never able to get his building designed and built, and he died like 1969.
Is there any monument or anything to his honor, or streets or anything like that named
A
after him?
couple of streets are named after him. Well, that's the funny thing as well. I don't know if it was the Calvary County that killed him, or the fact he got married 3 times. And so a lot of stuff down there is the streets he named after his wives and his kids.
Oh,
Okay,
he did?
named it in,
And it's still there?
They're still there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, at least he did that.
Yeah.
I mean, but if he could have implemented that plan he had, that would have been, for
Well, that would-
Calvert Town, that would have been awesome.
Right, it would have been completely different. It would have been before Prince George's County. I mean, we would have been the Prince George's County of the times, and it would have been predominantly black and wealthy, but that didn't happen. But as a compromise from that, to get them, because they were looking at the census reports at that time and saying, well, no one in Calvert County, none of the blacks in Calvert County can read, okay, and nobody's working, and we got to get them to work through this New Deal thing. So the compromise was to allow the building of a high school. That finally came in 1940, but it was because of this man and what he did that they were able to get that building done at the high school.
Now, well, did they have elementary schools before that?
Just that one-room schoolhouse, first through the 7th grade.
That was it.
That was it. Now, there were ways around it, and that's again where the mulatto comes in.
Yes.
'Cause as I
Let's
said,
talk about that.
It was a day-long trip to Baltimore if you wanted to be educated,
Right.
to get more than a 7th grade education. So some people from Calvary County did it. We had the first black doctor from Calvary County that was licensed in 1903. Okay, long before the high school in 1940. Now, here's the way you did it back in the old days. Usually everybody, like you said, your family, they were having 12, 14, 16 kids. So the parents and the older kids would work to save the money for the younger kids to go to
send them
school.
off to school. Yeah.
Right, so you may have 10, 12 that never get to do anything, but you might have 1 or 2 that you can send to Baltimore and pay for them to stay there. Okay, and they usually ended up at Frederick Douglass High School up there in Baltimore.
Okay.
And I know this, in fact, my father, again, was one of those that was allowed to go. But here's the catch. You had to meet 2 requirements in order for your family to give you that money. Number 1, you had to be a boy, male, because you're not going to waste the education on a girl, and that was said openly at that time. Okay.
Wow.
You expect a girl to get married and have kids,
Have
but
kids,
not
not to be
work.
educated, of course.
And the second requirement was you had to be light-skinned enough to pass for white or pass for something else. So, and my father was like that, was so light that he was often mistaken for white, and he would just say, I had cousins, brown-skinned cousins that were much smarter than I was, but they allowed me to go to school because of the way I looked. There was a logic behind it because, again, if you could pass for white or something else, you could go someplace else and pretend to be that and get a good job and then come back and help the family, send money back and help the family that way. And so it did work. So that's how that white doctor, or the light-skinned doctor, became a doctor in 1903. He went to Frederick County, pretended to be white, started his own practice up there.
So we also talking about passing here, because there was a lot of that going on as well.
That's what that was. You
Yeah.
passed. So yeah, that's why the mulatto comes in, because they were descended from slave owner and slave, and you use that. If you were light enough to do something else and pass
Right.
for white, go
You
ahead
did
and do
it.
it, and then you come back and you help the family later on. So it wasn't a negative thing that they distinguished like that.
You know, that brings me to a story about Langston Hughes. I did believe it's Langston Hughes. The autobiography of an ex-colored man talks about the tragic mulatto. William Willis Brown talks about the tragic mulatto as well. And then some of the things that you're telling me, it speaks to that as well. The
Yeah.
same thing, yeah.
Yeah.
How they would send them off to school and that kind of thing.
You use what you have. So you're familiar with the the courthouse here in Upper Marlboro, the Prince George's Circuit
Of course.
Court. And one of
Yeah.
those wings is named after James Franklin Bourne. James Franklin Bourne, they also named the
Who
Bar
is it?
Association after him. Bar Association. James Franklin Bourne was the first district court judge in Montgomery County and Prince George's County.
Black?
Yes, but again, descended from slave and slave owner. So his
Mulatto.
father went to that one-room schoolhouse in Calvary County. His father, James Franklin Bourne Sr., was light-skinned enough that they sent him off to college, high school and college, out of the county. He went to New Jersey and passed for white.
Wow.
Okay, and that was able to get James Jr. Enough of an education where he was able to go to Howard Law School and then come back here and be the first district court judge in the area. So it worked for him. That the other one, the doctor, Ulysses Bourne, they started a hospital. He started a hospital in Frederick County that's still there today that his family runs, the Bourne Hospital there. So that using a light-skinned person to go out and then come back to help the community worked.
That's all we had.
Yeah,
Use what you had.
Had to use what you had at that time.
Yes.
And they were willing, I mean, they did fight for other things that, you know, even if you were brown skin. We had a lady, and she finally got recognized, and she was actually my not high school, but elementary school principal. Her name was, and that's her picture there, is Harriet Elizabeth Brown. Okay, Harriet Elizabeth Brown in 1936, 37 noticed that she was getting paid less than the white teachers with the same qualifications as her white female teacher. So she was making like $600 a year. That's the entire salary.
Wow.
Whereas the white female was making $1,200 a year. And again, you don't compare men and women, but the men were getting a couple thousand, black or white. So black men got more than white women. Women were always at the bottom of the heap no matter what. Okay.
Yeah,
But she saw that, and each county had its own budget. So you could not sue the state. You had to sue each county by county. So
separately.
Right. So the teachers union were looking for people brave enough to come forth and file these lawsuits. And she was brave enough to do it for Calvary County. And again, these teachers that we had were brought from someplace else. Because, again, there were no blacks that could read or write after the end of slavery. So they had to come from someplace else that had schools and colleges.
Yeah.
And when they brought the black teachers there, and for the most part they were women, they had them sign a contract promising not to marry and not even to associate with other people in the county. Because you didn't want them to marry, start their own family, then you got to go search and find somebody else to come there and teach. And that was a hard process. So these ladies were there on their own. They didn't have family around them. They didn't have a lot
And
of
they
friends
didn't
around
want them to associate with the local people?
No, because you might then fall in love and start your own family. Because when I was growing up,
Well, that seems like to me the natural process.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I didn't pay any attention because I started in a segregated school because they didn't integrate until 1967. So all of my teachers were Miss Brown, Miss Jones, Miss Hawkins, like that. I didn't associate with them not being married. I just assumed, again, these are teachers and mean. So I said, you must be too mean that anybody wanted to marry you. That's what you thought. That's what I thought. I didn't realize I didn't let them marry. It actually backfired on them at one point because we did have, if you remember the movie Hidden Figures?
Yes,
Mary Winston Jackson.
Yes,
her
Miss
first
Jackson.
teaching job was in Calvary County. 1942, she came from
really?
Hampton to Calvary County. She taught for 1 year there, and she wanted to get married to her beau back in Hampton because she was Mary Winston then. She wanted to marry Mr. Jackson. And they said, you do that and you're fired. And she said goodbye. So lost
Wow.
her genius because they didn't want her
To
to
marry.
be married in 1942. So she went back to Hampton and then went on.
So
to
they could
England.
dictate whether you marry or not.
They
Wow.
dictated where you lived.
They
when you
dictated
were a teacher.
everything.
Yeah, when you were a teacher
Mm.
there, because they brought you there at their expense. They gave you housing and everything in order to teach the black kids.
Mm.
Okay, so yeah, that's one of the times it backfired on them in having that little rule there. But Harriet Elizabeth Brown was able to stand up to him and say, okay, I'm going to be willing to fight for you, because other people, other teachers in other counties were intimidated out of it, or they promoted them. They made him a principal so that you no longer had the rights to file on behalf of a teacher. But she did it, and she said, they said, we'll give you some help. So the NAACP was contacted. The NAACP in the late 1930s sent a young lawyer down to handle her case. And that, naturally, he won the case. But the young lawyer that the NAACP sent to represent her was Thurgood Marshall.
Oh.
And
the
we
great
still have his
Thurgood Marshall.
documents, his letters and things back and forth that he represented. It was one of his first
In Calvary
cases.
County?
Yeah, it's one of his first cases was this one against the Board of Education there in Calvary.
That was in what?
That was in the late
50s?
1930s, 1937.
Oh, he would have been a very young man then.
Yes, just out of law school. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, this is Brown versus Board of Education. The other one was until 54.
Well, of course, he ended up suing the state of Maryland because he's in the 50s. He's wanted to enter the University of Maryland.
University of Maryland Law School.
Yes.
I went to the University of Maryland Law School, and the library is the Thurgood Marshall Library, and he refused to come there at the dedication. He said, "You didn't want me then. I'm not coming there now." Yeah, so.
And they named it after him.
Yes.
Yes.
Even after him, even though he wanted nothing to do with it.
Do with it. Because, I mean, yeah, I don't blame him because you deny me then, now you're going to honor me?
Yeah.
Because he's a Supreme Court judge? I totally agree with him.
Well, yeah.
And so of course, they dedicated it anyway.
Well, yeah, so they
Yeah.
can take credit for his name, you know.
Yeah, but they didn't want his name. They didn't want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And I want you to hold your point right there, because this brings me to a piece I'd like to share. And it's simply entitled Chocolate Rainbow. White, brown, yellow, red, and tan, all shades of the rainbow come from the original man. The missing link to what we as a people lack is loving who we are in all shades of black. Mocha, sepia, sable, red bone, cinnamon, mahogany, pearl. Children of the sun living in the color-struck world. Whatever shade of ebony to ivory you might be, black is black. I am you and you are me. You can't possess the soul essence of somebody else. So to love and know who you are is to be yourself. Beyond our shackles of color-struck shame, as a people we are all colored one and the same. The one-drop rule will always undervalue and demean the wannabes, the jigaboos, and every shade in between. Black on black love is soul validation, despite our brown bag, blue vein indoctrination. Intra-race prejudice, preference, and pride are reflections of a past that cannot be denied. As a human rainbow with the wind at our back, the power of suffrage, black self-respect, comes in all shades of black. Honey brown, peanut butter, vanilla chocolate, copper tone, a mocha maple, nocturnal rose, raven brick house brownstone. Whatever shade of ebony to ivory you might be, black is black. I am you and you are me. From ruby red brown to a black peanut to a black walnut pecan, lemon strawberry peach to a beach sand color tan. The missing link to what we as a people lack is loving who we are in all shades of black.
I agree with that. Yeah. Which brings
Loving
me another
it up.
one point I want to make, because I did research every era of battles and wars. So we participated naturally in the War of 1812 and the Civil War. But World War I is particularly in my heart because we had six men from Calvary County that died
In World War I.
in World War I. And there's a monument there in the center of Calvary County that has the white soldiers listed that died here and the 6 black soldiers in this sort of faded thing on the other side. But in researching them, I found how they were treated during World War I, 1918, 1919, that they sent all of the black from all over the country, whether you're from Calvary County or any place else, were sent to France because they didn't want white soldiers to have to associate with
Black
the black soldiers.
So wait a minute, hold on. We fighting the same war, but we had to segregate.
Not only did you have to segregate,
Ooh,
we have a copy. They sent a letter to the French government saying, this is how we want you to treat them. We don't want you
They
to
dictated to the French government.
French government, we don't want you to eat with them, we don't want you to speak with them, we don't want you to socialize with them or anything else. We don't want them coming back uppity. Okay, and that was their language.
Wow.
The French government thought it was a joke, and they laughed it off, and they said, "No, you're idiots." So they put them into combat with their regular soldiers, treated them well, gave them all these medals and things every time they did something of valor, and that's why there were so many blacks that ended up going back to France.
Because of the way you're treated, like human beings.
Yes. Okay. No difference between them.
But when they came back home, quote unquote,
Just like when you came back from Vietnam, you still were second-class citizen. From World War II, Vietnam, Korean War, still, even though you're fighting side by side.
But that also reminds me of Muhammad Ali when he said to them that, you're going to send me over to fight somebody who ain't never done anything to me at all. And at the same time, when he come back from the Olympics, he couldn't go in his own hometown and get a hamburger at a hamburger stand.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I could not get. By the way, they didn't tell me where you could get this. You can get this off of Amazon.com.
Yes, please
you can
tell
order
us.
Amazon.com. Just go there and look up either Mulatto or my name, Michael Kent. But I couldn't get from the Calvary County government the draft records. Okay?
Why?
Because they sent more blacks. It was run by, at that time,
More
it
blacks
wasn't-
than whites.
It wasn't a random kind of thing. They
Right.
were picking who got
They
drafted.
pick and choose.
Pick and choose.
Did they
who was
use
drafted.
serial numbers? I mean, the
It
Social
just seemed
Security
like the
number?
majority of blacks were being sent to Vietnam, and there were more blacks that died in
Well,
Vietnam
yeah,
than whites.
yes.
Yeah, they were
In
sending
general,
more than-
but they did that all over the country.
Yeah, they were sending
Yeah.
more blacks, and that's when they came up with this lottery system after Vietnam. But they were just making sure they were sending more blacks to Vietnam than to whites.
Did they also use zip code as well, or just black
I don't know what
communities
they-
in general?
Yeah, well, they always knew. You always had a colored by your name if you were black, all the way up through.
Oh,
As a matter of fact, I was so angry. As president of NAACP, we had this occasion to help this guy trying to get a liquor license, and then they were holding him up, and so looking at the forms that he had to fill out, and this was in 2008.
Right.
In 2008, the forms that you filled out in Calvary County
For liquor license.
to apply for something asked you what color you were. In 2008, they had never updated anything because nobody ever complained, so they never updated anything. They were still asking what color you were.
Wow. In 2008?
Yes.
That's not that long ago. Do they still do that today, I wonder?
No, because it's illegal, and once we found out about it, obviously they had to go back and change everything.
That's amazing.
So a lot of it's just people making, you have to make some noise about things in order to
In
get
order
something
to
done.
change, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's always been the case.
Yes.
Now, with Mulatto, what is the main message that you want to get out to people concerning this book?
Well, this complex that I'm in here today, these people will be very proud of this. That's what their goal was, to advance and to control their own lives, their own
Yes,
businesses and things
always.
like that. And so the message is to young people today, these people really struggled mightily
They paved the
to
way.
give you the opportunities to do
Yes, and the
things
things-
today that you all have taken advantage
And
of.
you need to know about it.
Yes, you need to know
Yes.
what they went through, because they had a lot harder than what you have today. And nobody was loaning them any money. One of the things I have at the end of the book is during segregation, there'll be pictures back here. These are all the things that blacks built in Calvary County during segregation. Bars,
Oh, wow.
restaurants, movie theaters, anything you can imagine, without anybody loaning them any money to do anything.
On our own.
Yes.
All on our own. Now, is there a section that you may want to share, read, while you're here?
I don't know if we have time, but
No,
it's
this-
just in general, that's
Okay.
because a lot of it, again, is just storytelling on that.
But those stories are so important because in our communities, there's always been the predominance of the oral tradition.
Yes.
Yeah, stories are passed down from one generation to the next.
All right. One of the things that also is important, I was talking about the wars, the Civil War. Calvary County soldiers wrote the first black battle hymn for the Civil War.
Oh.
Where we are was a camp down there, Camp Stanton. It's right on Benedict, on the river down there. They trained over 6,000 colored troops there. It was called Camp Stanton, and they divided them up into regiments by what county you were from, because they said, well, if you're around people that know things like that, areas and things, you're less likely to run away, get mad and run away. Funny. Now, Camp Stanton, there were more black soldiers that died there than died in the Civil War. They didn't realize it. Again, it was right on the river. They had their drinking water down at the bottom, and they had their latrines, toilets up top here. So they died from malaria,
Disease.
any kind of disease you can think of. They died from it before they got into battle. But while they were sitting around the camp one night, the white commander, because the commanders were always white, was walking through, and he heard the Calvary County soldiers singing a song they had made up, and it was called "They Look Like Men of War." And he wrote down that song, and that's documented in the book as well. That white commander ended up when he came out, he founded Hampton University. So I found that in the archives of Hampton University.
Now, that song, was it copywritten?
Again,
Copyrighted
you
by
know,
him?
people don't know about things like that. It was actually copyrighted by the Mormons, word for word stolen by the Mormons, and they're still making money off of it today.
So it's actually seen as a Mormon's praise
Mormon
song.
song, you're right.
And it's not.
It's not. It was written by blacks.
Wow.
But they didn't know to copyright anything.
Yeah, they didn't know anything about anything like that. That was just, it's just so amazing, brother. I'm wishing you best with your book, man. I mean, oh, this is so amazing. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this. And a lot of research. A lot of research. Now, I want to talk also about your work with the NAACP. How'd that come about in Calvary County?
Just attrition. I think we had a president who had been president for like 30-some years, and then she stepped down, and then she'd asked me to come in to help. And so, yeah, it's just by acclimate, because I was looking, anybody else want to be president, you can have it, because there's a lot of work involved with it.
It is.
You know, a lot of running around, dealing with people. You have to know, get to know the entire government. Of course, in Calvary County, we have 5 white male county commissioners, Republican.
Oh, all of them Republican.
Every elected office in Calvary County but one is Republican. You're going to see
Really?
more Trump signs down there than anything else. We really haven't changed that much since the 1860s. When Abraham Lincoln ran for president the first time, he got 1 vote from Calvary County. When he ran the second time, he doubled that and got 2 votes. So, and it really hadn't changed a lot since then.
Wow.
But yeah, so
That's amazing.
it's tough to get some things done there, just because of the attitudes that. And again, we're shrinking as well. Since they were in power, one of the things that happened is they changed the zoning laws that made it too expensive for blacks to live in Calvary County. So it used to be you could build next to your mother's house, and then they said, no, now you got to have 5 acres to build on. Okay,
You got to have 5 acres to build on?
Right, but there's ways around it. You can buy what are called development rights, but again, we didn't have the money for the development rights.
But that costs a lot too.
Right, so the developers had the money for the development rights, so they could keep on building, whereas we couldn't. Used to be able to build just to put a trailer, you know, those little mobile trailers up there. They said, fine, now you need 25 acres for a trailer. Because again, they were...
You got to own 25 acres?
Got to have 25 acres to put a trailer on. Now, so who has that? If you got it, who's going to put a trailer on it?
Of course, yeah, they know, and of course they know that. That's why.
Right, and that's why the population went from us being 60, 70% of the population, we're down to 13% of the population in Calvary County now.
Wow. What is the percentage of African Americans?
That's it, 13%.
That's it. That is it.
That's it,
13%.
Right, and sadly,
Wow.
What about in the school system as well, and I've talked to kids in high school that said that they have never seen a black male teacher, much less had one.
Wow, isn't that amazing? And what about other ethnic groups like
We're getting
Hispanic
more
and
Hispanics, but they pretty much keep hidden coming in as workers. I'm not sure they're living there, but there's a lot of Hispanic workers there. And of course, the Asian population is growing because they're getting the restaurants and the gas stations. And for some reason, the Indian population are getting the 7-Elevens. So it all seems to revolve around work as to what they're able to do.
And the Dunkin' Donuts too.
We only have 1 Dunkin' Donuts in Calvary County that's owned by a black woman.
Oh, really? Okay.
She kept trying for years and years to get a second franchise. They wouldn't give it to her. And then finally they gave it to somebody that has 3 franchises in St. Mary's County, an Indian woman. And they said, now you can have another franchise in Calvary County. But they wouldn't give it to her.
Now, when they say they won't give you a franchise, what kind of reasoning do they? What kind of justification do they do for stuff like that? Or they just there's no justification. It's just who you know.
Well, a lot of it came down to that because the other people helped her. The economic development groups in the county helped this other Indian lady, but a lot of it has to do with location and the zoning laws and things like that. Like there's certain places that you can't have a drive-through window, things like that, and that can block you for whatever reason. So.
And what would be a justification if you have a store? Why couldn't you have a drive-through window?
That's a good question because
they just make up stuff as they go along.
A liquor store with it. You can have a cleaners. With
so what would be the difference?
What they want you to have there. That's the only difference. Again, it's whoever's in power wants to make the rules about what they want to do.
Oh, he who has the goal make the rule. That's right. I forgot that. That's how it is. Wow, this is amazing. Well, thank you for coming and sharing with us, brother. We've been talking with Brother Kemp, Michael Kemp, and we've been talking his book, beautiful book, Mulatto. And where can we get the book?
Amazon.com. It's been on sale since May of this year.
Also, people who may want to get in touch with you, because you are the president of the NAACP in Calvary County. How can we get in touch with you?
Anytime you can just email Calvert NAACP. Just Google that and come up with the email for that. or my personal email is mgkent57@gmail.com.
Okay. And you also open for speaking as well?
Yes, I've been speaking at a lot of places, a lot of churches. They've been very supportive of me. As a matter of fact, I'll give back to the churches a percentage of the book that they sell as well.
That's a great thing. So we wanted to continue to promote the book because I think it's a great book, and thank you for coming and sharing with us here on Color Me Poetry. It's been beautiful having you. I've learned so much, man.
I learned a lot from the poetry.
Yeah, I mean, Calvary County, I've been there, but I didn't know a lot of the history of Calvary County at all. There's so many counties in Maryland that I don't know the history of.
So I hope it encourages other people to go and research their own county history.
Yeah, I knew about Talbot County, Maryland, because I read the memoirs of Frederick Douglass, and the life and times of Frederick Douglass. I mean, it's just an amazing story. There's so many counties here in the state of Maryland that we don't really know the history of, and Calvary, for a lot of us, is one of those. So where do you see Calvary County going moving forth in the future?
Well, again, that's what the battle is now, where there's going to develop more, become like Waldorf or Prince George's County, or where there's going to stay rural.
Now, do you guys have Walmart down there and stuff like that?
Two Walmarts, but no big box stores. No Home Depot or anything like that. Those aren't allowed. It's just to keep it as country as possible.
Oh, so that's why. That's one of the reasons why it hasn't been very progressive in terms of development.
Right.
Wow, because that's not what they want.
Right. No apartments, things like that.
That's true. I've never seen apartments down there.
Right.
Wow, and that's as part of the plan.
Yes.
Wow, it's beautiful. Well, thank you, Michael Kemp, for coming and sharing with us on Color Me Poetry, and then again, we can tell us again one more time where we can get the book.
Mulatto: The Black History of Calvary County. You can get it on Amazon.com.
We thank you for coming and sharing. I'm poet Danny Queen, and until next time, Color Me Poetry. Thank you, brother, for coming and sharing with us, man. Really.
I am poetry. I am the living experience. I am the lifelong truth. Color me the poetry of nothing but the truth.
Color me a love child.